Feel the frost biting your fingertips. Hear the silence pressing against your eardrums like water at depth. Smell the pine and frozen earth, sharp and clean. This is Rendlesham Forest, December 26, 1980, and you're about to touch something that will rewrite everything you thought you knew about reality. You don't believe in UFOs. You're a trained military professional stationed at RAF Woodbridge, a NATO nuclear base in Suffolk, England. You've seen flares, satellites, weather balloons, aircraft lights bouncing off clouds. You know the difference between a threat and atmospheric phenomena. You know what's real. But tonight, standing at the forest edge with frost crunching beneath your boots, that certainty is about to shatter. Staff Sergeant James Penniston was 7 years into his Air Force career when the radio crackled at 02:47 hours. He was drinking bitter coffee, reviewing patrol schedules, when the voice came through tight with confusion. "Control, East Gate. We have lights in the forest, multiple colors, moving." Penniston set down his mug. It left a ring on the duty roster. Years later, he'd remember that ring as the last normal thing before everything changed. Moving how? Not like aircraft, not like anything. "You need to see this, sir." Beside him, Airman John Burroughs looked up from his magazine. 21 years old, 3 months on base, hungry for something more than gate duty. His eyes were bright with anticipation. "We're going," Penniston said, reaching for his jacket. The jeep ride took 4 minutes. 4 minutes of headlights cutting darkness, breath misting, that pre-patrol adrenaline sharpening. Except this time it felt different. Like your body knew something your mind hadn't admitted yet. They parked where pavement became dirt. Ahead, the forest was darkness punctured by something impossible. Light, blue and red, pulsing like a heartbeat made visible. Not fire orange or searchlight white. This was different, alive, deliberate. "You see it?" Burroughs whispered. "Yeah." They stepped into the forest. Have you ever walked toward something every instinct screams you should run from? That's what those first steps felt like. Trees closed around them, bare branches blocking moonlight. Their flashlight beams seemed weak, inadequate, swallowed by darkness that felt less like absence of light and more like presence of something else. The light pulsed ahead. 20 meters, 15. Penniston's training said, "Call backup, establish perimeter, follow protocol." But something deeper pulled him forward. Curiosity. That oldest human impulse that drove us from caves to cities to space. The need to know. 10 meters. The air changed. You could feel it on your skin, that pressure shift before storms. Except there was no storm, just humming, vibrating presence that made fillings ache and arm hair stand straight. 5 meters. There it was. Triangular. About 9 feet tall, 6 feet across the base. The surface wasn't metal in any way you'd understand metal. It was smooth, almost liquid, shifting between dark matte and reflective shimmer depending on angle. Like oil on water, except solid. Except impossible. Symbols ran along one side. Not letters or numbers. Pictographic, geometric, beautiful, in a way that hurt to look at because your brain couldn't process what your eyes were seeing. They glowed faintly, blue-gold, pulsing with the lights. The craft rested on 3 landing pads pressed into frozen ground. Perfect indentations. Perfect spacing. Perfect triangle. Around it, air hummed. Not sound exactly, vibration. You felt it in your chest, behind your eyes, at the base of your skull. The sensation of being near something so fundamentally other that reality itself bent around it. Burroughs stopped moving. "What is that?" Penniston didn't answer. He was already circling, flashlight tracing surface, looking for seams, rivets, construction signs. There were none. It looked grown, not built. Organic engineering from a mind thinking in dimensions humans hadn't discovered. "Should we touch it?" Burroughs asked. "You'd have done the same. Don't pretend you wouldn't when faced with the impossible made tangible, when given the chance to reach out and confirm, yes, this is real. You'd reach out too." Penniston approached slowly. His hand trembled. Logic screamed warnings. Curiosity won. His fingers made contact, cold, smooth, almost soft, like touching water's surface somehow solidified without losing fluidity. And the moment skin met surface, something happened. Images flooded his mind. Not words or sounds, just information pouring in faster than thought, faster than consciousness could process. Binary code. Endless strings of ones and zeros scrolling behind his eyelids like digital DNA being uploaded directly into his brain. He jerked back, gasping. "You okay?" Burroughs grabbed his arm. "Yeah, quote." Penniston stared at his hand, shaking. "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. Something had been placed inside him. A message. A transmission. A virus made of numbers that would live in his neurons for 30 years before he understood what it meant. They stood, watching. The craft continued its patient pulsing, indifferent to their presence or shock. Minutes passed. Could have been 5. Could have been 50. Time felt negotiable near the object, as if its existence bent more than just space. Then it moved. No sound, no thrust, no exhaust or heat. It just lifted, smooth and effortless, as if gravity politely stepped aside. Light intensified, flooding the clearing with brilliance that seared afterimages into their vision. The craft shot upward, threading between trees with impossible precision, and vanished into black winter sky. Darkness crashed back. Penniston and Burroughs stood in sudden absence, flashlights dim and useless. The forest was silent. No birds, no wind, just ragged breathing and blood pounding in ears. "Did that just happen?" Burroughs finally managed. Penniston looked at his hand again, still shaking. "Yeah, it happened." The walk back felt longer. Neither spoke. "What do you say when you've touched something from beyond the stars? What words exist for that?" Back at base, they filed their report. Words tumbled out. Unknown craft, metallic surface, symbols, physical contact, flight characteristics impossible by known physics. Master Sergeant Ray Golias listened with deepening concern. "You touched it? Actual physical contact with an unidentified object?" "Yes, sir." "And it flew away?" "Yes, sir." Golias rubbed his temples. This was going up the chain, way up. "Get rest." "We investigate at first light." But Penniston couldn't rest. Back in quarters, lying in dark, he could still see them, the ones and zeros, scrolling endlessly through his mind like a program running in background. He tried closing his eyes. The numbers were brighter in darkness. At 0400, he gave up, sat at his desk, pulled out a notebook, started writing. Ones and zeros, page after page. His hand moved automatically, transcribing something his conscious mind couldn't access, like taking dictation from his own subconscious, or from something else entirely. When he finally stopped, 37 pages were filled with binary code in cramped, urgent handwriting. He stared at them, exhausted, confused. "What are you?" he thought. "What did you put inside me?" The notebook had no answers. Not yet. Not for 30 years. 30 years later. 2010, New York City. James Penniston sat in a hotel room with a laptop open and the notebook beside it. He was 58 now, retired, still carrying that night's weight like stones in pockets. The notebook pages were yellowed, edges worn from decades of handling. He'd shown them to cryptographers, computer scientists, linguists. Most dismissed them. Some found unexplainable patterns. None gave answers. Until now. He'd had an idea. Simple, really. Something he should have tried years ago but had been too afraid to attempt. What if the binary wasn't encrypted? What if it was just binary? He opened a binary to ASCII converter website. His hands trembled typing the first sequence. Letters appeared on screen. His heart stopped. Exploration of humanity. He sat back, staring. Typed more. 52 degrees, 9 minutes, 42.532 seconds north. 13 degrees, 13 minutes, 12.69 seconds west coordinates. The code contained geographical coordinates. He pulled up a map with shaking hands. The coordinates pointed to High Brazil, a mythical island off Ireland that appeared on ancient maps but supposedly didn't exist. He typed more sequences. More coordinates appeared. Nazca lines, Peru, pyramids of Giza, Egypt, ancient sites, mysterious locations, places where humanity had done something impossible, something suggesting we'd been visited before. The final line read, Planetary advancement. Penniston closed the laptop, opened it, checked again. The words were still there. For 30 years, he'd carried this message without understanding it. A message about exploration, about humanity's development, about advancement. Placed in his mind the moment he touched that craft in a frozen English forest. They wanted me to know, he realized. They wanted someone to carry this information forward, to decode it when the time was right. He sat in that hotel room for hours, staring at words on screen, feeling the weight of 3 decades lifting even as new questions pressed down. Who sent this? Why these coordinates? What did they want humanity to understand? And the biggest question, were they still watching? Back to 1980. December 27th. Morning. The investigation team arrived at first light. Deputy Base Commander Charles Halt came personally, bringing a Geiger counter and skeptical mind. He was by the book, believed in evidence and procedure. UFOs? Nonsense. There had to be rational explanation. But when they reached the clearing, rational explanations got harder. 3 indentations in frozen ground. Perfect triangular spacing, soil compressed, frost, disturbed in patterns suggesting immense weight distributed across small contact points. Halt swept the Geiger counter over the landing site. The needle jumped. Radiation. Higher than background levels. Not dangerous, but present. Measurable. Real. Get samples, Halt ordered, voice carefully neutral. Soil, bark, anything unusual. A technician bagged earth from center indentation. Sir, what do you think it was? Halt didn't answer immediately. He stared at nearby trees, at branches broken at odd angles, snapped cleanly as if something had passed through without resistance, at scorch marks on bark, at evidence that couldn't be explained as weather balloons or atmospheric phenomena. I don't know, he said finally, but document everything. Over the next 24 hours, rumors spread through base like wildfire. Soviet drone, NATO test, mass hallucination. Everyone had theories. No one had answers. Penniston spent the day in fog. Couldn't stop thinking about binary code. Still there, vivid and insistent, like tinnitus for the brain. He'd filled 37 pages that morning, but the compulsion hadn't faded. The numbers wanted out. That night, unable to sleep again, he wrote more. 50 pages. 60. The notebook grew thick with ones and zeros, digital gospel from something not of this world. December 28th, 0200 hours. Charles Halt stood in Rendlesham Forest with tape recorder in hand, surrounded by small security team. New reports of lights had come in. Halt brought the recorder to maintain documentation, create unimpeachable audio record of whatever they found. What they found broke reality. "We're approaching the area now," Halt spoke into recorder, breath misting. "There are lights ahead." Multiple lights moving through trees. The team advanced slowly, and there, hovering just above tree line, was a light. Brilliant red and blue, pulsing with that same living rhythm Penniston had witnessed 2 nights before. Halt raised the Geiger counter, needle spiked violently. "We're getting significant radiation readings," he said into recorder, unable to keep tension from voice. The light descended, drifted closer. Team stood frozen, watching something that violated every physics principle they understood. Then it split. 1 light became 2, 2 became 3. They danced through sky, weaving patterns that seemed almost playful, almost taunting, as if asking, "Still think we're weather balloons?" The lights moved toward nearby town, casting impossible shadows across frozen fields. Then, without warning, they shot upward and vanished. Silence crashed back. Halt clicked off recorder. His hands shook. He looked at his team. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with shock of witnesses who'd just seen their worldview shattered. "No one discusses this outside official channels," Halt said. But his voice lacked conviction. "How do you keep quiet about something that fundamental? How do you pretend you didn't just watch the impossible become real?" Back at base, Penniston sat alone in quarters, staring at pages of binary code. He'd lived by certainty his entire career. Now uncertainty was all he had. And somewhere, encoded in these numbers, was a message he wouldn't understand for 30 years. But the message was patient. It could wait. If you're listening to this and wondering whether it's possible for something that profound to hide in plain sight for decades, remember this. Truth doesn't always reveal itself at once. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it speaks in a language we have to learn to understand. The cover-up didn't come with threats or guns. It came with paperwork and silence. 3 days after the incident, Penniston was called into a windowless room on the 2nd floor of the administrative building. 2 men waited. Dark suits, blank expressions. Air Force Office of Special Investigations, they said. Standard debriefing procedure. Nothing about this felt standard. "Tell us what you saw," the older one said, sliding a notepad across the table. Penniston had already filed written report, gone over every detail with commanding officers. But sitting across from these men with their cold eyes and colder smiles, he understood something fundamental. This wasn't information gathering. This was damage control. "I observed an unidentified craft," he said carefully. "Triangular, metallic, flight characteristics beyond conventional aircraft. Did you touch it?" "Yes." "And what happened when you touched it?" Binary code scrolled behind his eyes. 37 pages waiting to be filled. A message he'd carry for 30 years. Should he tell them? Would they believe him? Or would they think he'd lost his mind? "Nothing happened," he lied. "It was just cold." The man nodded slowly, as if expecting that answer. "Good. That's what we'll put in the final report. Nothing unusual. Probably downed aircraft or atmospheric phenomenon, you understand?" "I understand what I saw." "No, Sergeant. You understand what we're telling you." The man leaned forward. "This incident is classified. You will not discuss it with anyone outside official channels. You will not speak to press. You will not write about it. Are we clear? Crystal clear." This was how truth disappeared, not with bang, but with signature on non-disclosure agreement and quiet threat that followed you the rest of your career. Penniston signed the papers. What choice did he have? But that night, alone in quarters, he opened the notebook again. Binary code stared back, row after row of digital DNA from something not of this world. He might have signed away his right to speak, but no one could take what had been placed inside his mind. He just had to figure out what it meant. John Burroughs wasn't handling it as well. The 21-year-old airman had barely slept since that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the craft, felt the hum in his chest, remembered how reality had bent around that clearing like light through prism. His hands shook. Focus slipped. During patrol, he'd catch himself staring at tree line, waiting for lights to return. "You look like hell," his bunkmate said one morning. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're jumpy as hell." What happened out there? Burroughs wanted to tell him, wanted to grab him by shoulders and scream that they weren't alone, that something had visited them, that the universe was so much bigger and stranger than anyone realized. But words stuck in throat. Debriefing officers had made it clear: silence or consequences. So he swallowed the truth and let it rot inside him. Meanwhile, Deputy Base Commander Charles Halt was compiling his own report. Unlike Penniston and Burroughs, Halt had authority to document what he'd seen without fear of immediate reprisal. He was lieutenant colonel, decorated officer with years of service. His word carried weight. He titled the report simply, "Unexplained Lights." In precise, measured language, he detailed everything. Initial sighting on December 26th, physical evidence found at landing site, radiation readings, his own encounter on the 28th with multiple lights exhibiting intelligent movement. He attached photographs, sketches, radiation measurements. Then he sent it up chain of command to Ministry of Defense. And waited. Response came 3 weeks later. Single-page letter thanking him for his report and informing him that incident posed no threat to national security and required no further investigation. That was it. Case closed. Halt sat in his office, staring at letter. No follow-up questions. No request for additional data. No acknowledgement that something extraordinary had occurred. Just bureaucratic dismissal that felt less like incompetence and more like policy. They already know, he realized. Whatever we saw, they've seen before. The thought should have been comforting. It wasn't. January turned to February. Winter deepened its grip on Suffolk, and Forest grew quiet. Men who'd been there that night tried to move on with their lives. Some succeeded. Others, like Penniston, couldn't let it go. He'd become obsessed with binary code. Every spare moment, he stared at sequences, looking for patterns. It had to mean something. Messages didn't just appear in your head for no reason, but without key, without context, ones and zeros remained stubbornly opaque. Then, 27 years later, breakthrough came. You're probably wondering why it took so long. Why didn't he try sooner? The answer is fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of being crazy. Fear that decoding it would prove it was nothing, just random noise generated by stressed mind trying to make sense of trauma. But in that New York hotel room in 2010, with laptop glowing and notebook open, fear finally lost to need. When those first words appeared on screen, exploration of humanity, something broke open inside him. Relief and terror in equal measure. Relief that it was real, that he wasn't crazy, that the message existed. Terror at what it might mean. He spent the next 6 hours decoding every sequence in the notebook. Coordinates appeared one by one, pointing to locations across the globe, places where ancient civilizations had achieved impossible things, where stones weighing hundreds of tons had been moved and placed with precision that challenged modern engineering, where lines had been carved into earth that could only be appreciated from the sky, created by people who supposedly couldn't fly. High Brazil, the mythical island that appeared on maps for centuries before vanishing. Some said it was Atlantis, some said it never existed at all, but the coordinates were precise, pointing to specific location off Ireland's coast. Nazca lines, massive geoglyphs in Peruvian desert, visible only from air, created between 500 BCE and 500 CE by Nazca culture. Purpose unknown. How they maintained straight lines over miles without aerial perspective remained mystery. Pyramids of Giza, aligned with Orion's belt, built with mathematical precision that encoded pi and golden ratio, constructed with stones so perfectly fitted that knife blade couldn't slip between them. How did Bronze Age civilization achieve this? Other coordinates pointed to Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, Stonehenge in England, temples in Cambodia and Mexico. A pattern emerged. These weren't random locations. They were breadcrumbs. The final decoded phrase lingered on screen. Planetary advancement. Penniston sat back, mind racing. What if it wasn't just message? What if it was invitation? What if they'd been visiting humanity for thousands of years, leaving markers, waiting for us to connect dots, waiting for us to advance enough to understand? And what if Rendlesham was just latest contact in chains stretching back to dawn of civilization? The implications were staggering. Back in 1980, though, Penniston had no such revelations. All he had were questions and growing sense that his life had been permanently altered by 30 minutes in frozen forest. Other witnesses weren't faring much better. Airman Edward Cabansag, who'd been part of initial security team, refused to talk about it at all. When pressed, he'd simply shake his head and walk away. Thing he'd seen had broken something fundamental in his worldview, and only way he could function was to pretend it never happened. Master Sergeant Ray Goulias, who'd monitored radio that night, requested transfer to different base. He got it. Even Forest Ranger Gordon Levitt, who'd stumbled upon landing site the morning after, found himself unable to explain what he'd seen. 3 perfect indentations in frozen ground, arranged in triangle. Broken branches at impossible angles. Lingering sense of presence, as if air itself remembered what had been there. "What do you think it was?" his wife asked him one evening. Levitt stared into his tea. "I think," he said slowly, "that we're not meant to know. Not yet." By March, incident had faded from daily conversation on base. New assignments came through. Personnel rotated. Life moved on, as it always does, even after impossible intrudes. But for those who'd been there, who'd stood in that clearing or watched those lights dance through sky, nothing was ever quite the same. They'd glimpsed something beyond edge of human understanding, and that glimpse changed them in ways both subtle and profound. Penniston carried binary code with him everywhere. It became totem, reminder that reality was negotiable, and certainty was luxury he could no longer afford. Burroughs struggled with anxiety and health issues that would plague him for decades, issues he'd later attribute to radiation exposure that night. Air Force denied it. They denied everything. And Halt? He kept his tape recording. 30 minutes of audio capturing moment an experienced military officer came face to face with something that shouldn't exist. He'd play it sometimes, late at night, and listen to his own voice describing impossible in careful, measured tones. "We have clear view of it now," his recorded voice said. "It's definitely structured craft of some kind." Every time he heard those words, he remembered the feeling. Awe mixed with terror. Certainty that he was witnessing something that would change everything, followed by crushing realization that it would change nothing at all. Because that's the thing about encounters like Rendlesham. They don't upend civilization or force governments to admit truth. They just happen, quietly, to a handful of people who then have to carry weight of it alone. Official position never changed. Unexplained lights. Possible misidentification. No threat to national security. Case closed. But in years that followed, more information trickled out. Witness testimonies that had been suppressed, photographs that had been lost, documents that suddenly resurfaced with heavy redactions. Each piece added to puzzle, but picture never quite came into focus. Maybe that was intentional. Maybe truth about Rendlesham was meant to live in shadows, half-revealed and eternally debatable. Mystery that couldn't be solved but couldn't be ignored. Or maybe, just maybe, it was waiting for humanity to evolve enough to handle answer, waiting for right moment to step out of darkness and say, yes. We were there, and we've been here all along. In spring of 1981, Penniston was promoted and transferred to base in Germany. He packed his belongings, including notebook, and left Rendlesham behind. But Forest never left him. Years later, when journalists and researchers finally tracked him down, he spoke about it for the first time. Not because he wanted attention or fame, but because staying silent had become unbearable. Truth deserved to be told, even if no one believed it. "I know what I saw," he said in interview after interview. "I know what I touched, and I know that we're not alone." Simple words, profound implications. And somewhere in filing cabinet in Ministry of Defense, Charles Halt's report gathered dust, stamped with classifications and forgotten by everyone except few who knew that some secrets are too important to acknowledge and too dangerous to ignore. Lights never returned to Rendlesham Forest, not officially anyway, but locals still report strange phenomena near old landing site. Unexplained sounds, sudden temperature drops, feeling of being watched by something just beyond perception. Forest remembers, even if world chooses to forget. And on quiet nights, when wind moves through those ancient trees, you might hear something that sounds like hum. Not quite mechanical, not quite natural, just vibration at edge of hearing. Reminder that some visitors leave traces that never quite fade. James Penniston still has the notebook. 37 pages of binary code, handwritten in cramped, urgent script. He's shown it to cryptographers, computer scientists, anyone who might help decode its full meaning. Some dismiss it. Others find patterns they can't explain. Debate continues. But for Penniston, debate doesn't matter. He knows what was placed inside him that night. He knows it wasn't random or imaginary, and he knows that someday, somehow, full message will be understood. Until then, he waits and watches sky, because if they came once, they can come again. John Burroughs found peace, finally, in recent years. His health stabilized after decades of struggle. Veterans Administration finally acknowledged his service-related injuries in 2015, 35 years after incident. Classification documents listed his exposure as occurring during classified incident and acknowledged health problems were service-related. It wasn't admission that UFOs were real, but it was admission that something had happened, something significant enough to cause measurable physical harm. That acknowledgement, small as it was, felt like vindication. Charles Halt passed away in 2023, but before he died, he gave one final interview. Interviewer asked question everyone always asks: "Do you still stand by your account of what happened?" Halt looked directly into camera, expression grave. "Every word," he said. "I know what I saw. I know what we measured, and I know that our government has far more information about these phenomena than they've ever acknowledged. Truth is out there, but it's being kept from people who deserve it most. Us." Those were among his last public words. Final testimony from decorated military officer who'd spent his life in service to his country, and who refused to let that service include lying about most profound experience of his career. If you've ever felt like your missing piece of puzzle you didn't know existed, you understand what Penniston felt that night. That sense of something larger moving just outside your peripheral vision. that recognition that universe is stranger than we dare admit. They signed papers promising silence. But truth doesn't care about signatures. You'd have touched it too. Don't pretend you wouldn't. When impossible offers itself to be touched, human curiosity wins every time. The years passed like water through fingers, but Forest kept its secrets close. By 1990, Cold War was ending. Berlin Wall had fallen. World was changing rapidly, old certainties crumbling, new possibilities emerging. It felt like dawn of new era, full of hope and transformation. For James Penniston, it was year everything started clicking into place, though he wouldn't understand why for another 20 years. He was at conference in Washington, D.C., attending seminar on intelligence analysis, when he met Dr. Catherine Morrison, linguistics professor from MIT who specialized in code breaking and pattern recognition. They got talking over coffee, and somehow conversation turned to unsolved mysteries. "I have something," Penniston found himself saying, surprising himself with admission. "Something I've been trying to decode for 10 years. He showed her photocopies of binary sequences. Didn't tell her where they came from, just that they were important and possibly meaningful. Morrison studied them for a long moment, expression shifting from casual interest to focused intensity. "This is unusual," she said finally. "Pattern density is extremely high, too high for random noise. And look here." She pointed to recurring sequence. "This appears every 37 characters. That's not coincidence. That's structure. Can you decode it? Maybe. But I'd need original. And I'd need time." Penniston hesitated. Notebook had never left his possession. Giving it to someone else, even temporarily, felt like betrayal. But he was tired of carrying this weight alone. "I'll think about it," he said. He never followed through. Fear of losing control of information, of having it end up in wrong hands or dismissed as fantasy, kept him paralyzed. Notebook remained his burden to bear, for 20 more years. Back in Rendlesham Forest, pilgrims kept coming. Landing site had become something of shrine, marked now by official trail marker placed by Forestry Commission. The UFO Trail, they called it, with subtle nod to incident without explicitly confirming or denying anything. Every December 26th, on anniversary, dozens of people would gather at site. Some were believers hoping for another encounter. Others were skeptics looking to debunk whole thing. Most were simply curious, drawn by same impulse that's driven humanity since we first looked up at stars and wondered, are we alone? If you were one of those people standing in that clearing, maybe you felt it too. That subtle shift in air, that sense of depth to darkness, as if space between trees contained more than just empty forest. Maybe you dismissed it as imagination or power of suggestion. Or maybe you recognized it for what it was, residue of contact. Echo of encounter that bent reality just enough to leave permanent crease. Gordon Levitt, forest ranger who'd stumbled upon landing site that first morning, became unofficial guide for curious. Despite government's dismissal of incident, word had spread. UFO researchers, journalists, tourists started showing up, asking questions, wanting to see spot where something impossible had occurred. Levitt would lead them into forest, pointing out location where indentations had been found. Marks were long gone now, reclaimed by nature, but Spot still felt different. Colder somehow, quieter. Even birds seemed reluctant to linger there. "Do you believe them?" visitors would ask. "The soldiers, I mean. Do you believe they really saw something?" Levitt would pause, considering words carefully. "I believe they saw what they said they saw." Whether you choose to believe it is up to you. Diplomatic answer, but privately, Levitt had no doubts. He'd felt it himself that morning when he first approached site. Presence, awareness, something watching from somewhere just outside normal perception. Forrest knew, And it wasn't telling. In 2000, British researcher named Georgina Bruni published a comprehensive book about incident. She'd tracked down multiple witnesses, obtained official documents through Freedom of Information requests, assembled most complete account of events to date. When she contacted Halt, he initially refused to participate. "It's ancient history," he told her. "Let it stay buried. Colonel, with respect, it's not buried. It's being actively suppressed. Don't you think people deserve to know what their military observed?" That argument hit home. Halt had spent entire career serving public, protecting national security, upholding transparency within bounds of classification. But Rendlesham transcended normal classification concerns. This wasn't about protecting tactical advantages or intelligence sources. This was about something fundamental: humanity's understanding of its place in universe. He agreed to talk. Interview lasted 4 hours. Halt walked Bruni through everything: timeline, evidence, radiation readings, personal observations. He played her tape recording, letting her hear his own voice describing impossible in real time, and he told her something he'd never told anyone before. "When those lights moved toward us on second night," he said quietly, "I felt something. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. As if whatever intelligence was controlling those lights was acknowledging our presence, letting us see them, wanting us to see them." "Why?" Bruni asked. "Why reveal themselves to you?" Halt stared out window at Virginia countryside. "I don't know. Maybe they wanted us to start asking right questions." Book became instant bestseller in UK and reignited public interest in Rendlesham incident. Suddenly, witnesses who'd stayed silent for 20 years found themselves being contacted by researchers, journalists, government officials. John Burroughs, still struggling with health issues, was pulled back into spotlight. He didn't want to relive it, didn't want to be known as the UFO guy, but he also couldn't ignore what had happened to him. His medical problems were real, his suffering was real, and he was convinced they were connected to that night in Forest. With Halt's help, Burroughs filed new disability claims with VA, this time explicitly linking his conditions to radiation exposure during Rendlesham incident. VA initially denied claims. No documented radiation exposure, they said. Then Halt dropped bomb. He released previously classified documents showing that radiation readings at landing site had indeed been recorded, measured, reported up chain of command. Evidence had existed all along. It had simply been buried. VA had no choice but to reassess. You're probably thinking, why did it take so long? Why did Burroughs have to fight for 35 years to get recognition for injuries sustained in service? Because that's how cover-ups work. Not with dramatic conspiracies or men in black. Just with bureaucratic denial, lost paperwork, classifications that make truth inaccessible. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. But persistence paid off. In 2015, Burroughs was finally granted full medical benefits for injuries sustained during service. Classification documents acknowledged his exposure occurred during classified incident and that health problems were service-related. Small victory, but victory nonetheless. That same year, Penniston sat down with laptop one more time. He was 63 now, retired for over a decade. Notebook had been with him for 35 years, traveling from base to base, country to country, always close, always waiting. He'd tried decoding it in 2010, found those first coordinates and phrases. But he'd only scratched surface. There were more sequences, more messages. He could feel them, locked in those ones and zeros, waiting for him to understand. He spent 3 weeks working through every page, every line, every sequence. More coordinates emerged, more locations tied to ancient mysteries. And threading through it all, recurring phrase that appeared over and over in different forms. Eyes of your eyes. What did it mean? Was it poetry? Philosophy? Warning? He researched phrase, found it echoed in ancient texts. In Upanishads, the eye by which I see God is the same eye by which God sees me. In Christian mysticism, the eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. Message wasn't just about coordinates or ancient sites. It was about perception, about consciousness, about recognition that observer and observed are connected in ways we don't fully understand. Maybe that's what happened when he touched craft. Not just data transfer, connection, recognition, moment when two forms of consciousness met and acknowledged each other. Maybe that's what they wanted us to understand, that we're not separate from universe. We're part of it. And when we reach out to touch unknown, unknown touches us back. If you've ever stood under night sky and felt that pull, that sense of belonging to something larger, you know what I'm talking about. That recognition that we're made of star stuff, literally composed of elements forged in hearts of dying suns billions of years ago. That understanding that looking up at stars is universe becoming aware of itself. Penniston understood it now. 35 years later, sitting in quiet room with laptop glowing, he finally understood what they'd given him. Not just coordinates, not just message, but invitation. Invitation to expand our perception, to recognize that reality is bigger than we've been taught. That consciousness might be fundamental property of universe, not just emergent property of brains. That when we encounter other intelligences, we're not meeting aliens. We're meeting other eyes through which universe sees itself. Deep stuff, maybe too deep. But that's what happens when you touch something from beyond stars. You don't get simple answers. You get questions that go all the way down. Forest is still there, of course, still quiet, still watchful. Trees that witnessed that impossible night are older now, their rings carrying memory and patterns of growth that no one has learned to read. But memory persists, even in wood and soil, even in minds of men who've spent 40-plus years carrying truth too strange to be believed and too real to be denied. Modern visitors to Rendlesham sometimes report experiences of their own. Nothing as dramatic as craft landing, but subtle things. Feeling of being watched, electronic devices malfunctioning. Sense that air is thicker there, heavier, charged with something that makes hair stand on end. Are these real phenomena, or power of suggestion, expectation creating experience? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe point isn't to prove or disprove. Maybe point is to remain open, to acknowledge that universe is stranger than we imagine, stranger than we can imagine. But we keep trying to imagine it anyway, because that's what humans do. We reach, we explore, we touch unknown and let it change us. Just like Penniston reached out on cold December night and touched something from beyond stars. In 2020, Pentagon released official footage of UFOs, UAPs they called them now, unidentified aerial phenomena, encountered by Navy pilots. Videos showed objects moving in ways that defied known physics. No visible propulsion, no heat signature, instant acceleration, maneuvers that would kill human pilot. Suddenly, conversation shifted. What had been fringe topic became mainstream discussion. Former intelligence officials went on record saying, yes, these things exist. Yes, we've been studying them. Yes, they represent technology beyond our understanding. Penniston watched news coverage with mixture of vindication and frustration. Vindication that finally authorities were admitting something existed. Frustration that it had taken 40 years. Frustration that his testimony, Halt's testimony, testimony of countless other credible witnesses, had been dismissed for decades. But mostly, he felt hope. Hope that maybe humanity was ready now, ready to expand its understanding, ready to acknowledge that we're not alone, ready to ask bigger questions about consciousness, reality, our place in cosmos. In final analysis, maybe that was point of Rendlesham all along, not to provide proof, not to force disclosure, but to plant seeds, to create witnesses who would carry truth forward until world was ready to hear it. You're part of that now. By listening to this story, by considering possibilities, by remaining open to mystery, you're part of unfolding understanding. Maybe tomorrow you'll look at night sky differently. Maybe you'll wonder what else is out there, watching, waiting, hoping we'll evolve enough to join larger conversation. Maybe you'll understand that when Penniston touched that craft, he wasn't just touching machine. He was touching invitation. Invitation to humanity to step up, wake up, recognize that we're players in cosmic drama much larger than ourselves. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, think about those men standing in frozen forest, flashlights cutting through darkness, facing something that shouldn't exist. Think about their courage, their curiosity, their willingness to step forward when every instinct screamed to run. Think about Penniston carrying notebook for 35 years, waiting for right moment to decode it. Think about Burroughs fighting for 35 years for recognition of injuries sustained that night. Think about Halt recording audio evidence and keeping it safe despite official dismissal. Think about Forest, still standing, still watching, still holding its secrets. And maybe, in that space between waking and dreaming, you'll feel it too. That hum, that vibration, that sense of something vast and patient watching from just beyond perception. Forest remembers. Witnesses remember. And somewhere in darkness between worlds, maybe visitors remember too. They came once, left message, left markers, left invitation. Question is, are we ready to accept it? Are we ready to understand that universe is not only stranger than we imagine, but stranger than we can imagine? Are we ready to recognize that when we reach out to touch unknown, unknown reaches back? Penniston thinks so. That's why he went public with decoded message. That's why he keeps notebook close, keeps sharing story, keeps insisting that yes, this happened, and yes, it matters. Because maybe, just maybe, his role was never to prove. Maybe it was to provoke, to awaken curiosity, to keep question alive until humanity evolved enough to handle answer. And maybe that time is now. So tonight, as darkness settles and stars come out, remember Rendlesham. Remember that in December 1980, something touched down in English Forest and changed everything for a handful of people who were brave enough to investigate. Remember that truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just waits, patient and persistent, until we're ready to see it. Remember that binary code, carefully preserved for 35 years, spelled out invitation, exploration of humanity, planetary advancement, eyes of your eyes. Remember that we're made of stars, looking back at stars, universe becoming aware of itself through us. And remember that somewhere out there, maybe visitors are still watching, still waiting, still hoping we'll decode not just message in notebook, but larger message written in cosmos itself. Message that says, you are not alone. You have never been alone. And when you're ready to understand that fully, when you're ready to step into larger conversation, we'll be here, waiting. Good night. Sleep well. And don't be afraid to reach out when impossible offers itself to be touched, because that's when everything changes. That's when you become witness. That's when you carry truth forward, just like Penniston carried his notebook, just like Forest carries its memory, just like stars carry their light across impossible distances to reach your eyes tonight. Sleep now, dream deep, and know that universe is stranger, more beautiful, more alive than you've been taught. Rendlesham proved it. Binary code confirmed it. And somewhere in darkness, something is still pulsing with patient light, waiting for us to understand. The Pentagon revelations in 2020 changed everything and nothing at the same time. When those Navy videos went public, the Nimitz encounter, the gimbal footage, the Go Fast video, Penniston watched them over and over. The craft moved exactly like what he'd witnessed. No visible propulsion, instant acceleration, physics-defying maneuvers, and suddenly, Navy pilots were describing the same things he'd described 40 years earlier, the same things that had gotten him dismissed, doubted, investigated. He called Burroughs that night. "Are you watching the news?" "Yeah," Burroughs said, voice thick with emotion. "Yeah, I'm watching. They're finally admitting it. Not admitting enough." But it's a start, and it was a start. Former Pentagon officials went on record. Luis Elizondo, who'd run Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, confirmed government had been studying these phenomena for decades, that they represented technology beyond our understanding, that they posed potential national security concerns not because they were hostile, but because we couldn't predict or control them. Christopher Mellon, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, stated publicly that these objects demonstrated capabilities that appeared to defy laws of physics as we understood them, that they warranted serious scientific investigation, not ridicule or dismissal. But here's what they didn't say. They didn't say where they came from. They didn't say what they wanted. They didn't explain why they seemed particularly interested in nuclear facilities and military installations. They didn't connect dots that Penniston had been connecting for 40 years. Because connecting those dots meant admitting something far more profound than existence of advanced technology. It meant admitting that humanity might not be apex intelligence on this planet, that we might be observed species, that our development might be of interest to others who've been here far longer than we've been keeping records. The binary code coordinates suggested as much. High Brazil, mythical island that appeared on maps from 1325 onwards, always shown west of Ireland. Portuguese explorers claimed to have landed there. Scottish captain claimed to have circumnavigated it in 1674. Then it vanished from maps in the 1800s, dismissed as legend or navigational error. But what if it wasn't legend? What if it was location of something that didn't want to be found? What if coordinates in Penniston's mind were pointing not just to where they'd been, but to where they maintained presence? Nazca lines, created between 500 BCE and 500 CE. Massive geoglyphs visible only from air. Depicting animals, plants, geometric shapes. Some lines ran straight for miles across desert and mountains without deviation. How? Why? Official explanation: ceremonial purposes, walking meditation paths, astronomical calendar. But Penniston wondered, what if they were markers, messages meant to be seen from above? What if ancient Nazca people were visited, just like Rendlesham was visited, and they left record the only way they knew how? Pyramids of Giza, built around 2560 BCE. 3 million stone blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons, transported and placed with precision that challenges modern engineering. Aligned with cardinal directions to within a fraction of a degree, encoded with mathematical constants like pi and phi that Egyptians supposedly didn't know. Mainstream archaeology says human ingenuity, Thousands of workers, decades of labor, simple tools. But coordinates were specific. Not general region, exact location. As if saying, look here, really look. Question what you've been told. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Discovered in the 1990s. Dated to 9600 BCE. Predates Stonehenge by 6,000 years. Predates agriculture, pottery, writing. Yet someone built massive stone circles with intricate carvings during Stone Age, then buried entire site deliberately around 8000 BCE. Why build something so sophisticated, then bury it? What were they preserving or hiding? These were questions that haunted Penniston in years following decoding. Questions that suggested human history was far more complex than textbooks admitted, that we might have received help, guidance, intervention at crucial moments in our development. Planetary advancement. That's what message said, not planetary invasion or planetary observation. Advancement. As if our development was goal, as if someone had stake in our success. In 2017, Penniston attended conference on consciousness studies at University of California. Speaker was discussing quantum mechanics and observer effect, how act of observation affects what's being observed, how consciousness might be fundamental property of universe, not emergent property of complex brains. During Q&A, Penniston stood up. What if observation works both ways? What if when we observe something, it also observes us? What if consciousness recognizes consciousness? Speaker paused. That's actually consistent with some interpretations of quantum mechanics. The universe might be self-aware, experiencing itself through countless observation points, including us, and including others. If consciousness is fundamental, yes. Other observers, other forms of awareness would be inevitable. Eyes of your eyes. The phrase from binary code suddenly made perfect sense. The eye through which we see them is same eye through which they see us, not separate, not alien. Different expressions of same conscious universe. When Penniston touched that craft in 1980, maybe what happened wasn't data transfer. Maybe it was recognition. Two forms of consciousness meeting, acknowledging each other, sharing information in a way that transcended language or linear time. Maybe that's why a message took 30 years to decode. Not because it was encrypted, but because Penniston's consciousness needed to evolve enough to understand it, needed to wait for a moment when humanity as whole was ready to consider such possibilities. You're probably wondering if this all sounds too mystical, too new age, too far from nuts and bolts technology of triangular craft in forest. But maybe that's false dichotomy. Maybe advanced technology and expanded consciousness go hand in hand. Maybe you can't develop one without other. Think about it. Civilization that could bend space-time, that could travel between stars, that could place information directly into someone's mind. That civilization would have to understand consciousness at fundamental level, would have to recognize it as primary feature of reality, not secondary byproduct. And maybe they've been trying to tell us that. Through contacts like Rendlesham, through messages encoded in ancient sites, through persistent presence that manifests when we're ready to see it. John Burroughs understood this in his own way. After VA finally acknowledged his service-related injuries, after decades of struggle, he found unexpected peace. Not because bureaucratic recognition validated his experience, he'd never needed that validation, but because struggle itself had transformed him. That night changed my life, he said in 2018 interview, but not in way I expected. Yes, I saw something impossible. Yes, it affected my health. But it also expanded what I thought possible, made me question everything I'd been taught about reality. And ultimately, that was gift. gift. Interesting word choice for something that caused him decades of pain. But maybe that's how contact works. It's not comfortable. It's not easy. It breaks you down so you can be rebuilt with expanded understanding. Like caterpillar dissolving in cocoon before emerging as butterfly. Transformation requires destruction of old forms. Charles Halt understood this too in his final years. After official disclosure videos were released, after his testimony was vindicated by similar reports from other military personnel, he gave series of interviews reflecting on Rendlesham experience. "We're at turning point," he said in 2022, year before his death. "Not just in acknowledging these phenomena exist, but in understanding what they mean for us as species. We've been thinking too small, asking wrong questions. It's not about whether UFOs are real. Of course they're real. Question is, what does their presence tell us about nature of reality itself?" He passed away in early 2023, but his words lingered. What does their presence tell us about nature of reality itself? Maybe it tells us that reality is participatory, that consciousness shapes what we experience, that observer and observed are entangled in dance of mutual creation. Maybe it tells us that we're not separate from cosmos, we're expressions of it. And when we encounter other expressions, other observers, other forms of consciousness, we're really encountering ourselves from different angle. Maybe it tells us that universe wants to be known, that it creates observers like us and observers like them, so it can experience itself from infinite perspectives. Deep stuff. Too deep for government reports or official investigations, but not too deep for Forest at 3 a.m. when frost covers everything and silence becomes presence rather than absence. Not too deep for man who touched something impossible and carried its message for 35 years before understanding what it meant. Not too deep for you, listening to this story, feeling that recognition somewhere in your chest. That sense that, yes, this resonates. Yes, this fits. Yes, I've always suspected reality was bigger than I was taught. In 2023, 1 year after Halt's final interview, Penniston returned to Rendlesham Forest for first time in decades. He was 71 now, moved slower, got tired easier, but notebook was still with him. Worn and precious, pages yellowed, but words still clear. He walked UFO trail alone, declining offers from documentary crews and researchers who wanted to accompany him. This needed to be private, personal, just him and Forest and memory that had shaped his entire adult life. Standing in clearing where landing site had been, he closed his eyes, listened. Felt Forest was different now. Older. Some trees from 1980 had died, been replaced by younger growth. But something remained. Not just memory. Actual presence. Like echo that never fades. Like ripple in reality that continues propagating long after initial disturbance. He placed his hand on tree trunk, felt rough bark, solid and real. Then he thought about that other surface. Smooth, almost liquid, impossibly solid. 2 moments of contact, 43 years apart, connected across time by thin thread of consciousness that never broke. "Thank you," he said aloud to empty Forest, "for choosing me, for trusting me with this, for changing my life." Wind moved through branches. Might have been response, might have been just wind. Didn't matter. He'd said what needed saying. Walking back to car, he thought about all witnesses over decades. All people who'd seen something that broke their understanding of reality. All carrying their own versions of notebook, their own binary code that needed decoding. They weren't crazy. They weren't liars. They were observers who'd been observed in return, who'd touched unknown and been touched back, who'd been given gift of expanded perspective, even though gift came wrapped in doubt and ridicule. That night, in hotel room near Forest, Penniston opened laptop one more time, pulled up decoded coordinates, studied them again, looking for patterns he might have missed. And he found something new, something he'd overlooked before because he'd been focused on historical sites. But looking now with fresh eyes, he saw it. Coordinates weren't just pointing backward to past. Some were pointing forward to future locations, to places where something would be discovered, to sites that hadn't been excavated yet, to regions that would reveal something important about human history. One set of coordinates pointed to location in Antarctica under ice. Nothing there according to current maps, but coordinates were specific, deliberate, as if saying, "Look here next, dig here, you'll find something that changes everything." Another set pointed to ocean floor in Indonesian archipelago, region being surveyed for submerged archaeological sites. Region where some researchers claim to have found evidence of pre-flood civilization. They weren't just leaving breadcrumbs from past, they were leaving roadmap to future discoveries. Guide to places where humanity would find evidence that were older, more advanced, more connected to cosmos than current paradigm admits. Penniston sat back, stunned by implication. Message wasn't static. It was dynamic. It would keep revealing new layers as humanity's understanding evolved. As we developed tools to investigate these locations, as we became ready for next revelation. How far ahead had they planned this? How long had they been watching? How patient was intelligence capable of thinking in timescales measured in millennia? He thought about Halt's question. What does their presence tell us about nature of reality itself? Maybe it tells us that time isn't as linear as we think, that past, present, future are all accessible to consciousness that's evolved beyond our current limitations, that leaving messages across centuries or millennia is trivial when you understand time's true nature. Maybe it tells us that reality has layers, that physical world we perceive is just one frequency in vast spectrum, that other intelligences exist in other frequencies, occasionally intersecting with ours when conditions are right. Maybe it tells us that universe is far more alive than we've been taught, that consciousness pervades everything, that what we call aliens might be indigenous to Earth in ways we don't understand, existing here in dimensions we haven't learned to perceive. These weren't answers. They were bigger questions. But maybe that's the point. Maybe contact isn't about providing answers. It's about provoking questions that lead to our own evolution. You're part of that evolution now, by listening to this story, by considering possibilities, by remaining open to mystery even when certainty would be more comfortable. Tomorrow, you might look at stars differently, might wonder what else is out there, or in here, existing alongside us in frequencies we haven't tuned into yet. You might question official narratives that dismiss or debunk without seriously investigating. Might recognize that ridicule is often a tool for controlling what questions are acceptable to ask. You might feel pulled to investigate yourself, to visit Rendlesham or other sites where impossible has manifested, to look for your own evidence rather than accepting what authorities tell you is real or not real. That would make you part of story. Part of unfolding understanding that began in Frozen Forest 44 years ago and continues now, accelerating as more people wake up to larger reality. Penniston keeps notebook close, checks it regularly, wondering if new sequences will appear, wondering if message is complete or if more is coming, wondering if, in his final years, he'll receive confirmation that everything he's understood is correct. Or maybe he already has confirmation. Maybe fact that Pentagon released those videos, that former officials are speaking publicly, that UAP task force exists within government. Maybe that's confirmation enough. Maybe seeing younger generation take up investigation without stigma or ridicule. Maybe that's confirmation that his work, his courage, his 35 years of carrying weight of silence before speaking out, maybe all that mattered, made difference. Shifted conversation. Forest still stands. still watches, still holds its secrets for those willing to walk its trails with open minds and curious hearts. And somewhere, in darkness between stars or dimensions between thoughts, maybe visitors are still watching too. Still patient, still hoping we'll continue evolving, continue questioning, continue reaching toward them even when reaching seems impossible. Because that's what contact teaches us. That impossible is just word for things we haven't understood yet. That reaching toward unknown is exactly what consciousness does. That touching mystery and being touched by it is how we grow. So sleep now. Dream deep. Let this story settle into your consciousness like binary code settling into Penniston's neurons. Let it work on you in ways you don't consciously perceive. Let it open doors you didn't know were closed. And tomorrow, when you wake, maybe you'll see world little differently. Little more magical, little more alive. Little more aware that you're not observer of dead universe, but participant in conscious cosmos, experiencing itself through your eyes. Through your eyes. And through their eyes. And through eyes of everyone who's ever looked up and wondered. All connected. All part of same vast awareness. That's message of Rendlesham. Not that aliens visited, not that government covered it up, but that consciousness recognizes consciousness. That reality is bigger than we've been taught. That reaching out to touch impossible is exactly what we're here to do. Forest remembers. Witnesses remember. And now you remember too. Good night.